Welcome to the Mental Health in the Workplace webinar, and thank you for joining us today. This is Barb Rawson with Kirkwood Corporate Training. We will have time for questions at the end of the webinar. If you would like to hear more about this topic, please contact our sales team at 319-398-5623. It is my pleasure to introduce Lisa Schaefer, our presenter today. Lisa holds a master's degree in community and school counseling and is a certified mental health first aid instructor. Thank you, Lisa.
All right, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me here. And thanks everybody for taking time to be a part of this discussion today, and looking forward to kind of helping us end stigma in the workplace in regards to mental health and what I like to refer to as brain health as well. I always like to start out my webinars with a couple questions for you. Have you ever seen a friend or a colleague who really didn't seem like themselves? Maybe they were taking on too many things. Maybe they seemed a little exhausted, or maybe they seemed even a little bit agitated or easily aggravated. Did you say anything to them? Were you scared to help, or were you scared to say anything because you thought to yourself, what if I say the wrong thing? Or, you know what, I'm not a counselor, I don't want to get involved. So you decided to do nothing. Now the question for you becomes this: have you ever seen a friend or a colleague bleeding? Did you say anything or try to help? Or did you start saying to yourself, you know what if I do something wrong? Or, you know what, I'm not a doctor, so I probably shouldn't do anything. Our goal today is to really look at how we can start teaching first aid in the area of mental health. We do a great job with first aid and triage in the area of physical health, but what are we doing to help assist individuals with their brain health? And today's goal of our webinar is to really start looking at how we can create supportive environments that are trying to encourage and empower people to be able to have some discussions in this area and also be able to support each other without the stigma. And as we start moving into this arena of mental health first aid, there's oftentimes a lot of discussion that happens in what can I say, what can I say, what can I do different? Well, what comes to mind when we truly say mental health or mental illness, I think one of the things that we need to look at in reducing the stigma is mental health is just mental wellness. You know, how many of you guys have ever been stressed out and you're thinking to yourself, wow, I just need to get through the day? Or how many of you have actually just said to yourself, you know, I just need to take some me time and just decompress a little bit? Mental health and mental wellness is learning some coping skills on how we can deal with stressful situations. When it becomes a mental illness, that becomes a different thing. And we need to, again, be able to just talk a little bit more about that, because mental illness really is when we start to get in the way of living, laughing, or loving, as we say in the business. But one of the things that we start to see is, according to National Alliance of Mental Illness, this was put out through Massachusetts, and we have several NAMI organizations that I would recommend that people connect with. But really, you know, people are scared to dialogue about what might be bothering them because of fear of rejection, or the biggest thing is what is going to happen if they start to discriminate against me, because there is such a stigma in the regards of mental illness. One of the things I always like to encourage too is most mental health conditions are treatable. And oftentimes people who might be experiencing a mental health issue or a mental illness sometimes don't need to go to treatment. It's just local support. It's oftentimes self-support. It's connecting with the right environment and creating that system that is going to encourage. What you start to see too is really it's becoming challenging, because a third of the employees who need treatment rarely get the help because of the fact that they have some of that fear that's connected. Oftentimes in our companies, we do a great job of putting up an EAP number and then basically forget to talk about what that is or what the benefit is. And really, because there is such a concern, you know, we are looking at mental health issues as becoming the leading cause of disability. So it's really important for us to start looking at what is happening in our companies and how can we support our employees. What you see, again, I like to talk a little bit about mental health versus mental illness. You know, mental health is, you know, state of well-being, but it's also a time to think about, you know, what are things that might be causing me stress? And there is an inventory that we like to look at. It's called the Holmes-Ray inventory of stress factors, because we may be experiencing some stresses. How many of you have known a colleague who has experienced a death, of a family member, a death of a spouse. That's a top stressor that, again, people are looking for support and encouragement that they can definitely use some strategies to cope. But also the other thing that you see, the second top stressor for individuals is divorce. Have you started to notice people struggling when they're moving through changes? And that can be, again, looking at how we can help people with the state of well-being. But what we start to think about is, well, are you diagnosable? Do you have, depression? Are you diagnosed with depression? Do you need medication? Again, an illness is anything that's associated with some of this distress. Mental health is teaching people coping strategies. Mental distress is helping people work through some of those things that are keeping them stuck and providing opportunities for them to be successful. Illness is also, again, some problems just in school settings, work settings, family settings. And the biggest thing is we talk about it's treatable. And as you look at mental illness, the mental health first aid movement has done a lot of these statistics according to the National Institute of Mental Health. What they're finding is 1 in 5 have a mental illness, and it might be just a short-lived. We call acute stress. An acute stress disorder is something that's lasting for less than 6 months. Maybe I've had a divorce and I've had to deal with some of those situations. Even going on vacation can consider an acute stress issue and just having that support. So again, mental illness is, like I said before, the leading cause of disability. And you see also with mental illness, sometimes people have a tendency to want to use some type of other addiction as a coping mechanism. Maybe I'm experiencing a little bit of depression, so maybe I might go out on the weekends and try to utilize alcohol as a way to minimize my pain. So again, you see 1 in 10 full-time employees has an addiction, and how do we support and encourage them? So again, really the biggest thing is trying to help recognize and share support systems and encouragement as HR professionals and as colleagues within the workplace. What makes it a diagnosable illness? Well, again, it's disrupting your ability to live, laugh, or love is what I always like to say. And it can impact emotions. People sometimes resort to anger as, I just don't know how to cope, so I'm just going to be angry. You might not realize all the things that are happening behind the scenes, but you see some emotional outbursts. And again, like I said before, you don't always have to have treatment. Acute, less than 6 months, chronic, lasting more than 6 months. And some of the things that we start to see, and many of you may have seen some of these illnesses, these are diagnosable again. And again, you're looking at a variety of issues that we want to help give strategies and encouragement to. How do I know if somebody is having some distress? Well, anger. Maybe I start blaming others, especially when you start to do changes within your organization. Maybe some safety risks. Maybe they're having more accidents because they're not as focused in. Maybe there's some frequent absenteeism that you're seeing, some tardiness, this idea of the constant exhaustion. You might see some decreased productivity and even morale problems. In the workplace, you might see depression as weight change or withdrawal. You might see some personality changes or a sad mood. The big thing too is what you might see is some self-criticism. So again, these are just little things, but the one thing that I want to talk about, it's not always necessarily that. It could be something even on the opposite spectrum, because high functioning anxiety, you may see individuals who are detail oriented, but they're experiencing an anxiety where they're overthinking. You might not see that, but they may be experiencing that. Because oftentimes individuals, and one of the stigmas we have is, well, if they have a mental illness, they're not as productive. It can be totally different as well, where they're almost overachieving to the fact that they're causing themselves exhaustion. And again, because of that fear of failure. So just reducing and being aware of these two pieces. What if you have individuals who are experiencing both? That can become challenging as well. But the biggest thing, my friends, is to really think about how can I support these individuals, let them know that I care, and let them know that they don't have to be scared, that I'm creating an environment in which we support and dialogue and encourage each other to move forward. Because again, like I said, people go through stressful events, and as you're looking at, death of a spouse, divorce, separation, marriage, even getting married can be stressful for individuals. And so we have to look at what are some of those protective factors. And in our companies, are we doing things to help with wellness and the healthy practices? Are we engaging opportunities with giving people feedback on what's working and ultimately what they could do different next time? Are we giving good problem solving skills and training? If we have too many things coming at somebody, we might burn them out. Are we asking too much of individuals? Are there things that we can delegate? Time management strategies. These are all protective factors for individuals. And again, one of the things too is, are you creating a community within your culture? Do you have more of a culture of let's learn, let's educate, let's support? Or do you have more of a judgment? Well, they're not doing their weight. That's not fair. This isn't how it's supposed to be. What is your actual culture? And creating that culture becomes a key thing. Now, how do you help? Well, the first thing I always recommend to you is know your role. Again, because you want to be able to say some supportive things, there's some super simple things that you can say. Be aware though of right to privacy and again, your ability to help. My goal is to help people feel comfortable enough to be able to say these things. I'd love for you, if you do notice somebody as a colleague or a friend that's getting overwhelmed, hey, how are things going? You don't seem like yourself today. Is there anything I can help with? Now, if they say the word fine, I'm fine, I always caution people that fine has a tendency to mean feelings inside not expressed. So again, ask yourself, do I want to state more facts? Sometimes, I've noticed that you've been easily tempered, or I've noticed you don't seem like yourself in the meeting. I noticed you're not sharing as much. Again, just stating some of the facts and going to the facts can be helpful. The biggest thing though, my friends, is really the key is listening non-judgmentally. When I listen non-judgmentally, I'm not here saying, oh, you poor thing. Oh, that must be really tough for you. I'm not using what I call sympathy. I'm using empathy. I'm using things like, you know what, it must be this. How can I help? I can see where this is probably a challenge. How can I help? I always like to say, how can I help? Now, if it's a matter of going with somebody, going to the HR person that's designated to assist, or just listening. Sometimes people think that they're doing a good job of hiding everything. And if somebody notices and you say something, is there anything you want to talk about? Is there anything I can help you with? It's amazing when they start to vent. They'll basically say, man, I just needed to get that off my chest, and just thanks for listening. I always caution people like to talk to their pets if they're having issues, because their pets do not give them looks of judgment. They give them looks of what we call unconditional love, which basically means I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help you. I'm here to love you. I'm here to encourage you. And again, looking at being an empathetic listener. Now, the mental health first aid training is something that we're currently doing with organizations, and it's teaching you those skill sets to listen non-judgmentally. Oftentimes people think they are non-judgmental, but it's amazing sometimes how even your facial expressions, the nonverbals that you give off, can be considered kind of judgmental as well. How else can you help? Well, the big thing is having realistic expectations for individuals. Try not to burn out your machines, is what I like to say. If people are experiencing a lot of overwhelm, what we find is sometimes people keep saying yes because they're not sure how to say no, and they can have an increased level of anxiousness within the workplace and stress. So are we having realistic expectations and letting people know what those expectations are as leaders and as supervisors? Can we have consistent emotional support? Again, trying to identify ways in which we can assist in their problem solving on how to work through things. The big thing too is having hope. Sometimes people just need somebody to be a hope dealer for them. They want them to be that person that says, we can get through this. What strategies are working for you? Experiencing these types of things, providing some practical help. Again, have you thought about the EAP? This is what the EAP does. It's confidential. Would you like to go talk to somebody? Here are some other resources. Do you provide those resources? And then, again, just groups in the area. Lots of the hospitals, lots of the mental health institutions and areas and things like that have some support systems. But then even just a casual, hey, you want to get together on a Tuesday night and, just kind of look at positive ways to do things. So again, being able to provide some of those things. But then also, my friends, acknowledge what you can't do or you can do. Because I don't want you to think to yourself, I'm here to to be a therapist and I'm gonna, give them a bunch of therapy. No, you're here to be supporters. That's that mental health first aid. The doctor fixes, the first aid helps provide a short-term process to give them hope and encouragement. Big thing, don't give advice. Don't focus on what's right or wrong. Try not to minimize. Oh, that's not that big of a deal. Don't worry about that. You'll get over it. Those are things that can be very discouraging, very belittling, and oftentimes in the workplace can feel like it's a bit patronizing. So be cautious with those types of comments. These are some reassuring information versus advice, because oftentimes when I'm coaching within the organizations, I hear leaders want to give a lot of advice. I remember when this was happening to me, this is probably what you need to do. Anytime you're using the words need, should, have to, that's sounding more like advice versus, it might be natural for you to be hurt. I'm here for you if you want to talk. There's also people who are trained to help you work through some of these feelings. And the biggest thing, my friends, is you're not alone. Oftentimes, again, 1 in 5 is what they're saying, and they're often even saying 1 in 4 are experiencing some of these particular types of issues. So stop judging, start helping, and give hope that, again, they're not alone. What else can you do as a manager? Well, use your skills to, again, make people feel safe. The biggest thing is confidentiality. Again, try not to discuss things with people outside of kind of that collegial sharing. If it's going to impact somebody's performance, then you do that collegial sharing. If not, then try to keep that confidential. Confidentiality is going to build trust, and the trust within your organization is going to help you continue to grow and support and reduce some of that stigma. Also, discuss the changes in work performance. Like I said, getting back to the fact, I've noticed that you've been taking on more things. It seems like you're doing this. Are these deadlines reasonable for you? Or I've noticed that you've been absent. Are things okay? I've noticed that you've been easily agitated. What's going on? And again, familiarizing yourself with those resources. If you have books, oftentimes we call this bibliotherapy. Recommend a book to someone that is helpful. A lot of companies right now have some libraries, and in their libraries, they're putting things in there on how-tos. How do I overcome this? How do I overcome this? I had one company who even had one of the books, the Anxiety for Dummies, which is a great book to help people just understand. The title always makes me a little intrigued, but it's a great book to kind of encourage people to look at what can be done. So recognizing again that they may need some flexible scheduling, during that treatment period time, if they are seeking out treatment. Again, being aware of that to let you know if people are getting into treatment. Sometimes it's challenging to get appointments because some people are having to wait 2 or 3 months to get into treatment, and flexibility can be very challenging. So try not to schedule meetings or things like that in that particular area. Know your policies. Again, know what your employee assistance is about. What are those things? Publicize them, put them in your newsletters, communicate them in emails. Just starting that conversation with just a simple, this is a benefit for you. This is what it does. Oftentimes people don't realize an EAP has more than just kind of this idea of talking to a counselor. Several of them have ways to talk to financial people. They even have times to talk to lawyers. I mean, it's again, providing these systems that can help reduce some of those stresses so that mental health is a coping strategy so before it turns into a mental illness for individuals. And then being open to make reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation means a little bit of different things to individuals, but being aware that reasonable accommodation, just sometimes moving situations. If I've got somebody who has kind of an ADHD type of issue and they're right in the main traffic of where everybody's walking, those are easy distractions that if I moved somebody's office or moved somebody's cubicle, that might help. What's a reasonable accommodation? And the big thing, my friends, just be aware of the American with Disabilities Act. Again, trying to understand what can be done, how can I assist? And it's not just necessarily physical, it's again, that brain health that we're looking at. Encourage some self-help strategies as well. Companies are offering some lunch and learns. They're doing a lot more with meditation, yoga. I was just in a company the other day that they were doing 10-minute chair massages for individuals. There is another company that I work with that has a sensory room. You know, if somebody's feeling a little bit more stressed, they go into this room. It's a beautiful room. It's almost like you're walking into a Zen garden with a lot of greens and some of those zero gravity chairs, just for a minute, you know, just to take a 5-minute debriefer. They've got light music playing, just some of those types of things. Brief coaching sessions, you know, just be a brief coach. What's working? What can we do differently? What have you tried? Library with books, taking a work break. It's amazing. Sometimes you just need to step away and just walk around the block for a minute. That exercise really helps reduce some of that stress and increase those endorphins. Write down all the tasks that are causing you overwhelmed feelings, and then sit down with a manager and prioritize it. Or as a manager, let's write down all of those things and then get those clear expectations. You know, what is considered a great job? What's an average job? Helping your coworker focus on solutions. You know what, let's move past this. You know, have you ever thought about these types of things? Posting your EAP number, having suicide hotline numbers around. There's also a text that you can text and talk to somebody right now, because sometimes people don't want to have to verbalize it. They'd prefer to text it. So those are some things that, again, are some tips and some tricks. This, my friends, is just very surface level, but there's an excellent health conference that's coming up if this is something that you do want to continue to look at and work with. And of course, Kirkwood is available to help you with your mental health training. We do have the mental health first aid training that's helping with adults. That is an 8-hour session as well, to dive a little bit deeper in some of these particular areas. But again, my goal is to really truly encourage individuals to feel as though they can be supportive and not scared if they're starting to notice things in colleagues, and just saying something. If you see something, say something, and say in a way that it is non-judgmental and it's supporting, because we are all in this together, my friends. And the more we can continue to end the stigma of mental health and brain health, the more successful our companies are going to be with their productivity, their engagement, and of course their bottom line. So I'm going to open it up to questions. We do have the chat room that's available to you as well. And this, again, was just a brief look at some of these particular areas. So I will go ahead and open it up to questions. You can type in or unmute your microphone and share, and I'll do my best to answer those today, my friends. One thing I've learned in asking questions or putting things out for questions, I'll give you a tip. Every time you ask a question, you're supposed to wait a minute, because it takes a minute for somebody to formulate an actual response, actually understand the question that was being asked, and then also overcome the fear of sounding non-intelligent, and then actually verbalizing a question. So oftentimes I tell people, if you are working with individuals and you ask a question, wait a minute. It gives people time to process. But most of us want to jump into fix-it mode, and we get too quick to jump in with, you should do this, you need to do this, and getting into an advice giver situation. But I always like to say, wait a minute after every question, because silence can sometimes be therapeutic for us. So again, if there are questions in the future though, my friends, Barb, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to go ahead and share anything else in regards to this topic or Kirkwood's association?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Lisa, for presenting the webinar today. And I would also love to thank all of our audience for joining with us today. And if you are interested in learning more about this topic or bringing Lisa into your place of business for custom training, please contact our sales team at 319-398-5623. And I also invite you to attend our safety conference, and the information is on the screen for that.
Lisa?
Yes.
This is Phil with the MedQuarter. Early in your presentation, you mentioned NAMI.
Yes.
Could you give a couple other, what I would call local resources for businesses to tap into for this topic?
Sure, I would definitely touch base with any of your organizations. The one that I'm using, of course, and working with is the National Council of Behavioral Health. And they are the ones that are kind of spearheading the mission of mental health first aid. So that is a national organization, but there are individuals as well within your areas to touch base with. So if you Google that, also if you Google mental health first aid, you'll definitely get those pieces as well. In your areas, you probably also have some human services agencies. that are working in funding. I know in the particular areas we have Hillcrest that has an organization that does encourage and support mental health as well. Well, my friends, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And the one thing, if you can walk away with anything today, is truly be supportive and to encourage this idea of brain health. Because again, the more that we can continue to show support and encouragement, the more people are going to get rid of the fear and the discrimination factor. And the more, again, that we can offer that support, the higher our likelihood for productivity and engagement in the workplace. So please connect with us. And if there's things that we can provide in the future, again, Barb's an excellent resource. Please feel free to give us a call at these numbers. Otherwise, again, I appreciate you taking the time to be here, my friends.